it only took about 3% of the population to make a revolution. That people who were in the Communist Party, and who were really the vanguard of the movement. He is as his strategy, in my way of thinking, his strategy between 16 and today has been different than almost just about everybody else running, and most politicians who organize. He's built a freestanding national organization with chapters that exist not only to run him for president, but to elect other people and to push an agenda which he has developed over time. And, you could even sum it up in 10 or 15 points. $15 minimum wage, free college education, Medicare for all, and there's a number of other points. And that's the program. And that exists now within and outside the Democratic Party. It's not a Democratic Party caucus. It's Bernie Sanders' Our Revolution, or up in New England, Rights and Democracy in New Hampshire and Vermont. That's the name of the organization. They can pull out hundreds of people for meetings. They're for Bernie. So that's his base. It's an organizing base. So when people say, is he an organizer? He's an electoral organizer. It's not the same. It's a little bit of old style politics, but it's a lot of, organizing a caucus within and outside the Democratic Party.
So who, when you're talking about those sections, the pillars of who makes up his base?
Well, yeah, then, today or originally?
Let's do both.
Okay, so originally, let's look at Burlington when he got elected. Mm-hmm. Okay, he came in and he created this enough of a force with university students, disenfranchised neighborhood people, older people. There were some elderly people. I think that's a part of the base he's having trouble with now, of really appealing to older. But here he didn't have that problem because he wasn't tarred as a socialist when he ran for mayor.
So that you think that's the key?
It's a big key. Yeah, okay. It's the biggest cudgel they have. If you couldn't call Bernie Sanders a socialist, if he was willing to disown that, then it'd be a different situation. But he would never do that, and if he did it, he would be considered a hypocrite. So he kind of has no choice. But when he ran for mayor, he ran as an independent, not as a socialist. And there was not one news article that was published. Maybe my newspaper mentioned that he was a socialist. We might have brought it up, but we didn't make a point of it, and it wasn't used by the other campaigns. The only time it was ever used with any seriousness was after he was elected, to try to stop him from initially implementing his agenda, and then in his re-election campaign in 1983, the Republican candidate also used socialism and it'll never work anywhere, and it'll lead to higher prices and so forth. And there was a big ad, and it was a kind of a last-minute desperation move. Didn't work. And throughout the rest of the 80s, no one ever brought it up. That wasn't a relevant piece of information for anybody here in Vermont.
That's crazy, because it's all anybody talks about.
I know. It's kind of odd, isn't it? Yeah.
And so they kind of gave it a shot in the early years, didn't really land, so they just no one brought it up again.
Yeah. And also, you see, the thing is, demographics play a part here in Vermont. In Vermont, do you know the history of Vermont a little bit? The broad view?
Tell me, not
the broad view would be that, it was it was sort of not a part of the original 13 colonies. It joined later, so it's kind of like the reluctant republic, we call it, right? So then it becomes the most Republican state, from Lincoln right on through to, to Reagan. Okay, you never had a Republican presidential candidate who didn't win Vermont. And the state was run by Republicans from 1860 to 1960. The first Democratic governor in Vermont was 1962, right? Okay? And so then that was when the real demographic shifts began, first with ex-urbanites and young professional types moving from New York, Boston, and environs up into the good land up north. And then, later countercultural people like myself in the 60s and the 70s. And this was an in-migration, of significant strength, and people integrating and assimilating and taking roles. And so over time, the social consensus changed. And Bernie arises in the midst midst of that and becomes mayor. Some would say by a fluke, by 10 votes anyway, in 1981. But he shows that can be competent, and so he's reelected because there's no reason not to elect a person who's doing a decent job. And there was a generational change that these constituencies in Burlington had been neglected for too long. The young people, the counterculturists, the disenfranchised, the poor people, the elderly. And so he was able to create that coalition and sustain it and deliver what used to be in the old days called sewer socialism, but basically good government, reform government. What reform Republicans at one time would have been doing, and so that's sort of the and then by 1988 the political complexion of the state has changed so much that Democrats start to win the presidential race, and there hasn't been a Republican who's won a presidential race in Vermont since 1988.
Wow, so he was there, right, in the shift from a Republican state to a Democratic state.
That's right.
There's no flip-flopping. It was Republican.
Right, and he comes up as an independent outside with his own base, and he, in a sense, neutralized the Democratic Party. He kept running against them. So first he runs as a third-party candidate. Then he runs as an independent and wins. Then he runs for governor against a woman, Madeline Kuhn, the first woman governor. He ran against her in her first re-election campaign. That was sort of when I broke with him personally because I felt like it was premature. But I think he was thinking this is building the brand, He got 15% then. Then in 88 he ran for Congress and he got in the 30s. I can't remember the exact number. He beat the Democrat, right? He came in second, but he was beaten by the kind of the preppy Republican, who everybody thought, oh, this guy's going to go forever, Peter Smith. He looked like Robert Redford, literally. And then 2 years later he comes back and he beats that guy, right? And then...
When you say preppy Republican, is that like...
It's just a description. Yeah, I like the guy. He was a friend of mine.
So I guess, were Republicans in Vermont like someone like him? Like, not at all like the Republican Party of today, right? Just like a...
No, that exists in Vermont, the hard right, but it's marginalized. Okay. The only time that it kind of had any traction at all was around 2000 when Howard Dean was governor. Howard Dean was governor from 91 to 2002, I think. And, I think he's one of the longest serving governors, 2-year terms, too, we have.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then in 2000, there was this kind of right-wing populist movement under the slogan of Take Back Vermont. A little bit like Make America Great Again, Take Back Vermont. And a woman candidate, Ruth Dwyer, ran. She did not do well, though. And the Republican Party didn't really like her that much. They tolerated her as a candidate because she'd won the primary fair and square. But in the end, it sort of reverted back. And, the Republican governors that we've had, Jim Douglas and now Phil Scott, are all moderate Republicans. If you look at the record, of how they've responded, even during the Bush years, there was always a kind of a separation. They didn't support Bush lockstep. James Jeffords, who was a Republican senator and congressman for many years, left the Republican Party. So Vermont had a different kind of Republicans. It's, Yankee Republican. It's sort of similar to the Republicanism of Maine, I would say. There's, environmentally conscious, conservationist oriented. There's certain traditions that are in play here that may not be in play in other places. Okay. Good government, business oriented. So conservative on economics, but more liberal and tolerant on the social issues and on the environmental issues. And that's been the kind of the general perspective of the Republican Party. So even though now most of the top officials, we have like 6 top constitutional offices, Attorney General and such. The only one that's a Republican is the governor, and we keep sort of electing these Republican governors and everybody around them as a Democrat.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, but I think it's a hedge. To me, it's always seemed like a hedging of the bet, is that, we really want to be progressive, but we don't really want to screw up the state. So we're going to kind of choose a careful steward, someone who's really going to take care of this precious resource we've got here. There's a bit of preciousness about Vermont. Vermont's very progressive, but part of the image is a kind of a specialness, a certain exceptionalism. We're different. We go our own way, and now Bernie Sanders saying, and we've got a message for America. We're gonna sort of make the start, plant our flag, and then we're going to, and someday America will say, he said this in speech, someday America's going to say, thank you, Vermont.
Really?
Yeah. When he won the Senate race, it's a clip of him saying, someday people are going to say, thank you, Vermont, for not only for electing him, but for doing something different, for going a different way,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
so that does explain some of the context, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you were talking about him running for Congress.
Yeah.
Then he got in Congress. Talk to me about...
Well, are we going to do the mayoral?
Yes, that's what I... Yeah.
Okay.
So I was just going to say, talk to me about sort of him... Oh, you were saying mayoral...
Well, you said his executive experience. That's sort of what you said.
Yeah, I'm doing... So two different stories. Okay. But one you were saying... Okay. Which I don't know if I cut you off midway, but his mayoral base versus 2016 versus now.
Now I guess I didn't. Yeah, I didn't deal with now. That second part of your question, which is how I would describe the base now. Well, I mean, he's now a media figure and he's a celebrity. So there's a certain additional quality that attaches to that. And that also means that base that he's already built, that kind of, as you described it, similar to Trump base, that whatever that percentage is.
Do you think it's similar to Trump, or am I just...
No, I see a lot of... I mean, listen, I've written... In the book itself, there's a kind of a section where I compare him to Richard Snelling, who was the Republican governor. You may remember that. And in a way, Trump and... the comparison with Trump and he are the same. Bernie has certain elements of him that I don't even want to say demagogic, but he has this tendency to see himself as as the voice and as the person who understands, and there's a certain kind of underlying, not authoritarian in the Trump sense, but the strong-willed individual who goes his own way and is not beholden to anyone. That idea, and and also building your brand beyond the reach of party, of special constituencies, but also of any kind of substantive accountability. One of the things that people would say about Trump today is that who's he accountable to? Nobody really. He just goes off on his own. Bernie, similarly, he's managed to build a movement, both in Vermont in the old days and now nationally. But it's a very amorphous movement. It's not a political party. It's his loyalty to the Democratic Party. The Democrats would say no. Many would say he's not even a Democrat. He's this guy who's visiting us and telling us he's offering us this additional constituency if we adopt his platform, and has managed already to get the party to adopt much of his platform.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But he's not accountable that much to the party. That's why they have to keep asking him, you're not going to run if you don't get the... I mean, they have to get...
He gets so mad when...
Yeah, I mean, because he knows he's made that promise. So he's mad because he knows it's really a talking point, and he's settled that question. He's not going to run a third-party race. He made that decision years ago. I think he made it long before even he announced the first time, before they even asked him the first time, that he assessed the situation. He looked at all of the previous people who had tried to do what he's trying to do, Ralph Nader, Henry Wallace, Eugene Debs. He's in the tradition of these people politically and ideologically to some extent, and realized you cannot do this outside the major parties. Mm-hmm. He had to convince progressives, however, that it was okay. And that was the first hurdle.
It was okay
not to run independently, not to run as an independent or a green or on some new party that was created. That was really where he was being pushed. That's what he was resisting. And if you look back at the coverage of him in the period before he announced, say, 2013, 2014, he's sort of going around the country asking a rhetorical question. I think I should run. I don't think anybody